After being kidnapped, I lost my memory. I mistook the kidnapper's boss for my husband, kissing and touching him without restraint. Unfortunately, the kidnapper's boss only had a handsome appearance, aloof and abstinent, refusing to be touched, until my fiancé, who had been pretending to be dead, called, "Stella Taylor, are you dead out there? Come back when you're done making a scene." The kidnapper leader took away my phone, kissing me until I was breathless. His tone was cold, not dead. She was quite comfortable calling for her husband. My fiancé grew anxious, kidnapping me into the wedding room in the middle of the night, wanting to have the wedding night early. That night, George White, the heir of the White family who had influence in both the underworld and legitimate circles and dominated the Beijing social scene, smashed the wedding room, his coat draped over me, his expression terrifying. "Darling, how dare he kidnap you? Should we kill him? Tear up the ransom note." I never expected Frank Lincoln to really not come to save me. His tone was calm and indifferent, mingled with the deafening rock music from the bar. It pierced my heart with a sharp pain. "Frank, who is it?" A soft, delicate voice came through the receiver, unbelievably clear. She was the new young starlet that Frank Lincoln had taken under his wing. "No one." The phone was tossed carelessly onto the table. I couldn't dwell on my discomfort, my voice trembling with tears. "Frank Lincoln, I really have been kidnapped. I'm not lying." The other person responded with a faint, mocking tone. "Stella Taylor, your little tricks are too amateurish. You've already agreed to marry me. Don't be too greedy. You've got my body, but you'll never have my heart." Even the kidnapper laughed. I looked down at the knife pressed against my neck, my voice trembling. "Speak up quickly, he'll definitely believe it." The kidnapper stopped laughing and informed the other party in a deep, rough voice. 10 million, northern suburbs, money for goods on the spot. Frank Lincoln laughed. "How much did Stella Taylor pay you to help put on this act? I'll double it. Play along with her to your heart's content. Act however you want. Just don't bother me." "Frank Lincoln, are you really not going to save me?" I still held on to a glimmer of hope. A coquettish voice interrupted the conversation. "Frank, you're not paying attention." The ambiguous sounds pierced through the eardrum via the receiver. Between light gasps, Frank Lincoln found a moment to say, "When you're done making a fuss, come back, I'm busy." After the call ended, only the cold echo remained in the empty warehouse. The two kidnappers, cigarettes dangling from their mouths, discussed openly without hesitation. "What should we do? Knock him out and send him to our boss's bed." With a slender waist, long legs, and a sharp tongue, the boss really likes this kind of girl. Just slip her a dose of medicine, and she'll be ready to be carried over. I don't know who this boss they're talking about is. What if he turns out to be a burly, heavily tattooed old man with a cigarette dangling from his mouth? Am I really going to die here? "Bro." The girl ran away. "Hurry, chase her." In the end, 2 legs can't outrun 4. The kidnapper knocked me out with a single blow. I woke up again in bed. I couldn't remember anything. The blanket was pulled over my head, and the bedroom was dimly lit. I don't know how much time passed before faint sounds finally came from outside. The low, muffled voice was hard to make out clearly, but my mind had already sketched the image of a man with quite a refined demeanor. The bedroom door opened, and footsteps approached from a distance. For some reason, I felt a bit nervous. The sound stopped by the bedside. Pausing for a moment, the blanket over my head was pulled away, and I found myself face to face with the man in front of me. I didn't recognize him. But damn, he was good looking. That was my first thought. The short hair is neatly styled and spiked forward, with bold eyebrows, a high nose bridge, and surprisingly, a pair of thin lips that reveal an enticing red hue. The skin is a wheatish tone, and there's a mole on the Adam's apple. The chest muscles are well developed, with 8-pack abs, and the pants are noticeably bulging. It's just that the gaze is very cold. It gives off an aura of being restrained yet highly capable. The man was taken aback for a moment, then pulled the blanket back over himself. He clicked his tongue in displeasure. With a click, the lighter was opened, and the man lit a cigarette. Amidst the swirling smoke, he leaned against the headboard and made a phone call. I was lying right next to him. The moment the call connected, the man's questioning followed immediately. Impatience had reached its peak. "Where did the woman with the lecherous look in my bed come from?" The other party's reply was very vague. "I only roughly heard something about being kidnapped. Not very obedient. Fiancé fell down. I do remember my father, the current head of the Tang family, driven by greed and obsessed with arranged marriages. It seems my father wants me to marry the man in front of me, and since I refused, he had me tied up and brought here. Unfortunately, I fell and lost my memory, so This man is my fiancé, but with such good looks, how could I have refused? I see. That's great, you're really good at making decisions for me. The man's voice carried a hint of laughter, but it was tinged with coldness. The person on the other end of the phone was too frightened to speak. I struggled to crawl out from under the blanket, sensing the movement. The man on the phone lifted a corner of the blanket, his slender fingers brushed across my cheek, gently scratching my chin. Like someone focused on a task unconsciously petting a cat, it tickled me a little. I opened my mouth and took a bite of his finger. Hiss, young master, what's wrong? He regained his composure. It's nothing, the cat you tied up just bit me. Does he really think I'm a cat? I angrily bit him again. The man hung up the phone directly and lowered his head to silently gaze at me. His dark eyes were so calm that not a single ripple could be seen. I stared at him, then stared again, and finally blushed and looked away. His smile was full of mockery. I thought you had more guts than that. I bit my lower lip, feeling so embarrassed I wanted to run away. You have only one chance to leave, get out now. He probably already knew I didn't want to marry him, but, I'm kind of having second thoughts. I whispered softly, it's not impossible, I'm quite adaptable, even though you're so fierce, you're also so good-looking. Honey, what do you think about us making do together? I spoke with a hint of shyness, my face flushed red. My heart was bursting with fireworks. What did you say? The man turned my face out from under the blanket. He hooked his index finger under my chin, clearly intrigued. His sword-like brows lifted slightly, the corners of his lips curling up. A teasing gaze swept across my face. What did you just say? His deep voice made my heart itch with anticipation. I blushed and whispered in response, husband. The man let out a light hum through his nose. My name is George White. Oh, aren't you afraid? George White seemed a bit surprised. I'm already his person. How could I be afraid? I shook my head. I'm not afraid, really not leaving. Not leaving, George White said disdainfully. You're too young. Then you can take care of it first, I said, beating him to it. His patience was about to run out. I don't keep idle people here. I'm already your fiancé, and you still call me an idle person. Could it be, George White? Could you untie me first? It's too uncomfortable being tied up like this. George White unwrapped me as if opening a gift, his well-proportioned fingers slightly bent, hooking the rope open. It felt a bit suggestive. Finally breaking free, I wriggled and crawled out. But who would have thought that the person who tied me up actually dressed me in that kind of outfit? The black lace fabric only served to make things more obvious. George White turned his head away, threw the blanket over me, and walked straight out. Get your things and get out. No way, you're not even tempted by this. I gritted my teeth, grabbed George White's wrist, and pulled hard, causing him to fall onto me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, tilted my head up, and kissed him. George White clearly didn't react in time, freezing for several seconds before trying to push me away, but I had already wrapped myself around him with both arms and legs. However, I hadn't learned how to kiss either, so I could only kiss him clumsily. One of his arms circled my waist to keep me from falling. The sun-kissed skin encircled the fair, slender waist, a touch that was impossible to ignore, but his other hand gripped the back of my neck, pulling me away. We locked eyes. And I averted my gaze, feigning shyness. George White's eyes were clear and bright as he brushed his thumb over the corner of his lip, which I had accidentally bitten. Don't try to force a kiss if your kissing skills aren't up to par. He set me down, and I grabbed his hand. Then can you let me practice more? George White was speechless. Stella Taylor. Hey, George White leaned back on the sofa, his long legs crossed, and he lifted his thin eyelids to look at me. I was wearing the shirt he had temporarily found for me. The pants dragged a long stretch on the floor. Do you know how you got here? I know, I was kidnapped. George White's expression didn't change much. You really did fall and become foolish. I am speechless. Come here. Oh, I sat next to him, right up against his arm. I don't know what his attitude is now, so I sneak a glance at him out of the corner of my eye. His profile is sharp, with distinct and strong features. The warm light falls on his brow bone, softening his fierce expression. His expression is casual, making it hard to tell how he feels. George White pulls out the first aid kit from under the coffee table, rummages through it with his large hand, picks out a box, and tosses it at me. Apply the ointment on your head as you see fit. A tough guy with a tender heart, so warm, this might leave a scar. Use it or not, it's up to you. His tone wasn't very pleasant. I can't see. Can you help me? I blink and take his hand. George White endured it again and again, then pulled his hand away, using a cotton swab to dab the bump on my forehead. Unskilled, very casual, it's not applied very evenly. I stared straight at him, and he got annoyed by my gaze, throwing away the cotton swab in my hand. That's enough. No, you didn't even spread it evenly. I wanted to get a closer look. George White completely ignored my complaint. He stood up. You can sleep in any of the guest rooms on the second floor. Tomorrow, I'll have a doctor check your head. I wrapped my arms around his waist. Where are you going? He glanced back at me, his expression as if he were looking at an idiot. Can I sleep with you? Late at night, George White saw the girl lying on his lap and dialed the string of numbers sent by his subordinate. Who is it? It's late at night. Can't you let people rest? Ignoring the complaints on the other end, George White got straight to the point. Your daughter is in my hands. David Taylor was startled, then it dawned on him. It was just his unloved youngest daughter. He snorted coldly. You want me to ransom her? Dream on. She ran off on her own, so you can keep her. Of course, we don't need your ransom money, but I heard the Tang family just got engaged to the Lincoln family. What will you say if she goes missing by then? George White lifted a strand of Stella Taylor's hair by her ear, twirling it around his fingertip. David Taylor finally recognized whose familiar voice this was. He swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? At the upcoming bidding meeting, I hope you won't cause too much trouble, otherwise. David Taylor certainly knew the consequences. The White family had connections in both the legal and illegal worlds, with foreign forces entrenched everywhere. In recent years, the focus of the industry has shifted to the domestic market. Within less than 3 years, George White, the new head of the White family, has already established a dominant presence in the capital. Their methods are beyond imagination. David Taylor hurriedly responded, I know, I will behave properly at the bidding meeting. I also hope you will take good care of Stella. How is she doing now? George White glanced at the person on his lap and hung up the phone without hesitation. In her sleep, Stella Taylor was restless. She frowned slightly, still holding George White's fingers in her hands. Every now and then, she gave them a gentle squeeze. George White withdrew his hand and noticed a few drops of saliva stuck to his fingers. He wiped it off with a tissue in disgust, then moved Stella Taylor's head off his lap. At the turn of the stairs, George White glanced back at the person sleeping on the sofa. He irritably ran a hand through his hair, went back down, and picked up Stella Taylor. His expression was impatient, but his movements were gentle. The legs clad in wide trousers dangled in the crook of his arm. As George White carefully avoided the doorframe, he casually stuffed the person into a guest room. After staying at George White's place for a few days, I rarely got to see him. There was a large boxing ring downstairs on the first basement level, where George White often sparred with his subordinates. I'll just sneak down to take a look. George White has a great physique, and his subordinates are also impressive, especially when they're drenched in sweat and throwing sharp punches. It really captivates me. Today, George White's subordinates seem a bit different, fair-skinned and clean, though with some muscle. He was far inferior to George White. George White almost completely outclassed him in every way. His punches were fast, accurate, and fierce, his gaze sharp and unyielding, his eyes devoid of any emotion. His jawline was clear and defined, and as he moved, the muscles in his face twitched slightly. Sweat beaded on his forehead and trickled down his cheeks, meandering along his neck. His muscles were well-defined without a trace of excess fat, his back line smooth and fluid, the muscles in his back stretching with each movement. The waistband of the pants sits low on the hips, sweat trickling down the contours of the muscles, swirling at the Adonis belt before disappearing into the hidden depths. The sun-kissed skin only adds to the allure. Each punch lands with a solid thud, leaving the handsome opponent bruised and bloodied, a trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. Struggling to rise, he is pinned down by George White and subjected to a relentless beating, too ruthless. Every move and technique was incredibly satisfying to watch. Suddenly, the handsome guy with the pale face tried to launch a sneak attack. I knew George White could dodge it, but I still couldn't help but shout out. That handsome guy lay on the ground, extremely frustrated. Damn, cough, I could have hit it. What were you shouting for, little beauty? Although he was blaming me, he called me a little beauty. George White shot a sharp glare at him, and the handsome guy quickly covered his mouth. Sorry, cough. I shouldn't have flirted with the sister-in-law. Brother, has your iron tree finally bloomed? When did you get a girlfriend? She is Stella Taylor, the daughter of the Tang family. Next time you see her, remember to call her by her name. I get it, but bro, what kind of heavenly life are you living? With such a little beauty by your side, she didn't make a sound even after you beat me up for so long. How come the moment I try to sneak attack, she's in a hurry to warn you?" George White ignored him and walked straight up to me. He was very tall, looking down at me, his gaze no longer carrying the aggression from before. A vast expanse of spring scenery seemed to burst open before my eyes, mixed with the scent of male sweat and hormones filling my nostrils. I tightened my grip on my dress, feeling a bit uneasy. My eyes were inexplicably drawn to a certain red, staring blankly. "Who told you to come here?" It wasn't an accusatory tone, more like simply not wanting me to see all of this. "Just came to take a look." I felt a bit embarrassed and tried to make conversation. "Are you okay?" "It's fine." "Oh my God, you're killing me with your affection." I was almost beaten to a pulp, and no one even cared about me. George White took off his boxing gloves and walked inside. "Let's not come here again in the future. It's dirty and messy." I followed him. How could that be? After all, the men here are beautiful. George White walked to the bathroom door, turned back, his voice hoarse and damp. "I'm going to take a shower. Are you following me too?" My face flushed. "It's not impossible." The response I got was the sound of a door closing. The boxing arena was hot, and I walked out. The handsome guy with the pale face was still lying on the ground, grimacing and unable to get up, but he still had the mind to gossip. "My name is Charles White, his younger brother." "Beautiful lady, how did you meet my brother?" I saw his face bruised and swollen, with blood-flecked foam still bubbling from his mouth. "Should I call a doctor for you? You look like you're about to die." Charles White was speechless. "Ah, it's nothing. My brother had it much worse when he was a kid. Back then, he and my dad were abroad, and my dad really beat him half to death. Otherwise, I wouldn't be suffering like this now." "Woo-woo, calm down. If it weren't for your brother, maybe the one beating you up would be your dad." Tisk. Charles White rested his head on his hands. "What kind of charm is it? With such a sharp tongue, why does my brother still keep you by his side?" "Actually, I'm the one who's clinging to your brother." Charles White was shocked. "He's so fierce. What do you see in him?" "I want to sleep with him." Charles White's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "What are you all talking about?" I was so startled that I trembled. "And nothing. I'm going back now." I covered my pounding heart and returned to the bedroom, only to suddenly remember that my easel was still in the living room. Since George White wasn't home, the lighting in the living room was brighter, so I had moved the easel there. But in the painting, George White was completely naked. I hurriedly ran out, only to see George White about to flip open my sketchbook. I rushed over and quickly pressed down on the sketchbook. "It's not well drawn." "Don't look," George White calmly said. "I've already finished looking. I was just closing it for you." A person can die, but they cannot die of embarrassment, especially in front of the person in question. George White curved the corner of his lips. "The drawing is good, but there are still some differences from reality." I refused to admit defeat. "Of course, after all, the real person isn't in front of me. If you have the guts, take off your clothes and stand in front of me, and see if I can draw you accurately." George White's eyes flickered as he closed the sketchbook. "A young lady like you shouldn't have such impure thoughts all the time. TSK, I think you're just scared. Drawing you isn't the same as sleeping with you, so what are you afraid of?" George White paused, then turned around. He approached me while taking off his shirt with one hand, his body still fresh from a shower. "How should we do this? What pose do you want?" "I'm at your command, Miss Tang." I stepped back, covering my face, then awkwardly lowered my hands. Just sit on the couch. Any position is fine, if you don't mind." "Could you also take off your pants?" I suggested softly. "Sure." George White uttered these two words, his fingers resting on his waistband, ready to take them off. I nervously closed my eyes. After waiting a few seconds, I quietly opened them a crack. I saw George White's eyes smiling, extremely close to me. If I lifted my head, I could kiss him. I flusteredly averted my gaze. "With such a timid heart, who gave you the courage to look at men?" "George White, do you know how unfair it is to tease me from so close?" Yet he sat calmly on the sofa, covering his waist with a blanket, and started reading the documents. As for me, my hand holding the pen was trembling. I never thought I would be particular about beds, but I am particular about George White's bed. I slept in his bed for the past few days, but today he came back, and I was kicked out to the guest room. Recalling the breathtaking spring scenery I saw today, standing barefoot by his bedside, I thought I had gone mad. George White was sleeping soundly, and I quietly lifted his blanket, slowly slipping inside. Surprisingly, it didn't wake him. Outside the window, rain began to fall, and thunder rumbled in the distance. George White frowned slightly, shifted closer to me, and then wrapped his arms around me. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and the touch of his hand felt warm and springy. Before this, I always thought chest muscles were hard. I was so excited I couldn't sleep. Stella Taylor, have you touched enough? No. George White woke up. His face was unbelievably gloomy. Me, hee, who let you in? The voice, just woken up, was a bit hoarse. Carrying obvious impatience, I nestled in his arms, peeking out from under the covers with my eyes. It's thundering. I pointed toward the window. I think you're afraid of thunder, so I came to keep you company. George White closed his eyes, momentarily stunned for 2 seconds, his drowsy voice tinged with resignation. Go to sleep. I chuckled and gave his abs a couple more pats. I didn't sleep all night, but the next day, I was the only one left in bed. I thought our relationship had gotten a bit closer, especially since we had been physically intimate, but George White clearly doesn't like me. No touching, no caressing, wrap the towel around 3 times after a shower. His gaze is so cold it could freeze someone to death, adhering to the attitude that pursuing someone requires effort. I occasionally show my attentiveness, until I blew up George White's kitchen, killed the flowers in the greenhouse, and broke the shower head. George White told me to save it. Be good, go play by yourself. He smiled and ruffled my hair, but I couldn't help feeling a hint of gritted teeth. I lay on top of George White, my arms wrapped around his waist. George White tried to loosen my hands locked around him. What are you up to again? I may not be good at much else, but I'm still skilled at my main job. Don't move. Let me measure your 3 sizes. I'll design a set of clothes for you for free. A top domestic designer personally measuring your 3 sizes. Don't be ungrateful. George White pried open my hand. Does your family measure 3 sizes by touching with hands? Seen through. Right, just my family. Want to beat me to death. George White finally looked away from the documents. Move one more time, and I'll break your hand. I booked a doctor for tonight, so I can help you get it fixed while we're there. How ruthless. I held George White's hand and placed it on my chest. You're so scary. Can you hear how panicked my heart is? George White was speechless. I never expected George White to actually find a doctor for me. When Dr. Song saw me, he joked with a smile. Oh my, George White has finally had a change of heart. Such a rough man, yet the girl he's raising is so lovely. I felt a bit embarrassed by the comment. Enough with the nonsense. Check what's wrong with her head. George White interrupted Dr. Song's teasing with a cold expression. Nothing serious. Just a head impact causing temporary amnesia. Exposure to past experiences might help with recovery. Try to stay in a good mood during this period. Thank you. As Dr. Song reached the door, George White suddenly thought of something and called him back. Prescribed some medicine for the bump on her head, something that won't leave a scar. Dr. Song clicked his tongue as if he had seen a ghost. I was even more stunned. George White had actually taken my words to heart. You have to understand, back in the Tang family, even if I got hurt, bumped into something, or broke my leg, no one would care about me. I looked at George White, who was leaning casually against the doorframe, watching Dr. Song examine my injury. Noticing my gaze, he averted his eyes, turned around, and left the bedroom. After seeing Dr. Song off, I thanked George White. He leaned back on the sofa and beckoned me with a slight gesture of his finger. I lowered my head slightly, and George White glanced at the medicine I had applied as if checking homework. Sure. This was the first time I had observed George White up close. His features were undoubtedly striking. He looked quite fierce when he wasn't smiling. When I'm irritable, I feel like twisting someone's head off. When I compromise, it feels like I'm smiling on the surface but secretly plotting to kill you. Laughing? I've never seen it. What are you looking at? George White tilted his head, his eyes slightly narrowed with a smile, patiently waiting for my next move. George White, I just, Thank you. I quickly kissed him on the lips, then ran upstairs. George White was stunned for a moment, then lowered his head, rubbed the tip of his nose with his index finger, and a smile curved at the corner of his lips. He smiled. It's so rare, but his smile seemed like my illusion. After this incident, he returned to his cold attitude. Can't flirt, just can't flirt. Not only that, he even started staying out all night. George White used to come back every 2 or 3 days, but this time he actually didn't return for a whole week. I was happy to have some peace and quiet, no need to go to work, just receiving packages and ordering takeout, binge-watching shows and playing games. It was simply heaven. My best friend sent me a message. Stella, I haven't seen you around lately. That deadbeat has been at the bar every day. Who? Julia sent me a photo. In the chaotic, intoxicating bar, a man was holding a girl, tilting his head back to drink the wine she was feeding him. The liquid soaking his collar, utterly debauched. Is this the new guy at the bar? Julia sent a string of question marks. Is that Frank Lincoln? You used to be all over him. I used to have terrible taste. I picked a photo of George's back and sent it over. I secretly took this while he was taking off his clothes. Looking at it now, it still makes my heart flutter. Under the dim light, his bronze skin and tight, powerful back muscles, with water droplets rolling down, are incredibly alluring. Julia, who is this new husband? You're amazing. I was happily admiring the photos on my phone, reminiscing about George White's firm and bouncy muscles. When he came back drunk. The person supporting him had a shaved head, closely cropped to the scalp. He looked somewhat familiar to me, and as soon as he saw me, he began to stammer, Miss Tang. The spiky-haired guy was clearly startled. Do you know me? I. The boss mentioned it, hee. I looked at the man leaning against me, my brow slightly furrowed, his hair a bit messy and tousled. He actually mentioned me. What's going on? The boss had a business dinner today and drank a bit too much. Then you can go. I'll take care of him. What are you afraid of? It's not like I'm going to eat him. I threw George White onto the sofa. He lay with his head tilted back, his neck and jaw forming a smooth curve. The overhead light fell on his prominent Adam's apple, and the black mole on his neck rose and fell with each breath. His suit jacket was open, and the top 3 buttons of his shirt underneath were undone, faintly revealing the outline of his chest muscles. The hem of his shirt was pulled out, and his clothes were in complete disarray. 2 long legs encased in tailored suit pants were spread apart, casually bent, with the tips of his shoes pressed against the leg of the coffee table. George White paused for a moment, then lifted his thin eyelids and saw me. His voice was low and hoarse. Why are you still here? That was a rather infuriating thing to say. George White took out a cigarette and held it between his lips, perhaps because he had been drinking. He struggled a bit to find his lighter. I pressed his hand down and said, let me find it for you. He stopped moving and stared straight at me, with a sharp gaze, wild and intense, and a hint of mischief. I steeled myself and straddled his waist, soft, hot. I didn't speak, feeling around in his jacket pocket, then in his pants pocket. I didn't find the lighter, but his clothes were even more rumpled. I actually rarely see him in a suit. At first glance, he appears respectable and well-mannered. Upon a second look, he seems slick and untrustworthy, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's the only phrase that comes to mind. What are you doing? He wears a smile on his lips, both dangerous and captivating. My hand slid from his shoulder to his chest, the thin muscles tight and sexy, my fingers hooking onto the buttons of his shirt. Did the social event go well? It went quite well. I didn't know what to say, so I silently began unbuttoning George White's shirt. Strange. He didn't stop me today either. The outfit I promised to make for you is finished. Look, it's over there. On the coat rack in the living room hung a black, long-tailored suit jacket with simple embroidery on the chest. It would look good on someone with broad shoulders. Looks good. Went to an auction the day before yesterday and picked up a little trinket. George White took out 2 pink diamond earrings from his coat pocket. These were a casual creation by the world's top designer, Alder. During a burst of inspiration while in love, however, due to her state of mind at the time and the exquisite design, they were hyped to an astronomical price. You call this little thing a gadget? Only you girls like these illusory things. No one at my place wanted it, so I brought it over for you to play with. How can I not believe it? Because George White's villa is in the suburbs, with a beautiful environment. But it's really too far from the city center. The delivery was slow, so I grumbled a bit. George White found it annoying and assigned a third-in-command bodyguard who practiced boxing to specifically handle my deliveries. The tall and burly bodyguard always had a dark expression as he carried a pile of packages, including even trendy hot items from physical stores in bulk. George White looked at the room full of strange and unusual things and reluctantly let me be. Aren't you looking for a lighter for me? George White glanced at his clothes, his eyes looking as if he wanted to devour me. You stripped me like this. What are you trying to do? The drunk George White wasn't as fierce. Instead, a layer of desire veiled his eyes. I pulled the cigarette from his lips. How can smoking be as interesting as kissing? The moment I possessed him, George White pressed his hand against the back of my head. This could be considered the first real kiss between George White and me. George White's lips were dry but soft, and his teeth gently bit my lower lip. Open your mouth. When I couldn't catch my breath, I whimpered and pulled back, breathe, be good." In the brief moment I was gasping for air, George White grabbed the back of my head again, his palm cupped my head, his fingers threading through my soft hair, sending a strange, tingling sensation through me. My hands involuntarily climbed onto his shoulders, pulling his shirt open even more. Something beneath me quietly pressed against me. I silently extended my guilty hands. Ding dong, an untimely message. The screen lights up at just the right moment. Frank Lincoln, Stella Taylor, CB Bar, come over now. Who is this person? George White's eyes were calm and deep. He paused for a moment, then let go of me. His voice was still a bit hoarse from the kiss. "I'm going to take a shower, get some rest early." I grabbed his hand, but didn't know what to say. George White withdrew his hand. "Get some rest early? Could it be that you're jealous?" I glanced at my phone, wondering why I still had such a disgusting WeChat contact. I angrily deleted his WeChat. George White casually draped his coat over the sofa, unbuttoning his shirt as he walked. I followed him step by step. Don't get the wrong idea. According to my best friend, he's just a male escort. Are you keeping him? Of course not. At the bathroom door, George White turned around. Got it. Now get out. No, no. I clung to the doorframe. George White looked at me, his eyes questioning. What's up? I tightened my grip on the hem of my clothes. I can help you take a bath. George White's eyes darkened, and he closed the door even more swiftly. No need. I took advantage of my small frame and squeezed in. Drunk people shouldn't bathe alone. It's easy for accidents to happen. Is that so? George White said with a hint of playful interest. Really? I'll cover my eyes and promise not to look at anything. I was utterly sincere. What ill intentions could I possibly have? All right then. George White's lips curved slightly as he gestured with his chin toward the corner. Stand there, turn around, and don't look back. I had just taken my place when I heard the rustling sound of clothes being removed behind me. Shortly after, George White tossed his shirt over my head. The scent of male hormones mixed with the soapy fragrance of the shirt overwhelmed me. I pulled it down, holding it in my hands, completely at a loss. The shower head turned on, water dripping sporadically onto the floor. Realizing that George White had already started washing, I clutched the clothes in my hand even more nervously. The steam in the bathroom flushed my face red. Glancing inadvertently at the wall in front of me, I was so startled that I lost all awareness. My mind is completely blank. The wall is reflective. I can clearly see George White's inverted triangle figure, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, perfectly proportioned. I can even see George White's bathing movements clearly. He lowers his head, combs the hair from his forehead back with his palm, and water splashes everywhere. As I moved, I could see the shape. I was so embarrassed that I felt uncomfortable all over. George White chuckled softly. I thought you were so capable, but you can't handle this already. I stubbornly retorted. It's nothing special. It's not like I haven't seen it before. My mind was wandering. And I didn't notice that the sound of water behind me had long since stopped. My arm was grabbed by a damp hand, and George White pulled hard, pressing me against the vanity. His hand cushioned my lower back to prevent me from bumping into it. George White had finished his shower. His hair half dry and dripping, with only a towel wrapped around his lower body, he braced his hands on either side of me, his body pressing down slightly. A few strands of his slicked back hair fell loose, and George White's gaze was scorching. Stella Taylor, he murmured my name, his lips grazing the corner of my mouth. Tell me, who else have you seen? How am I supposed to answer that? I was so flustered my face turned red. George White grabbed my slender, pale wrist and pulled it under the hem of his towel, his captivating eyes fixed on me, his expression openly teasing. Sensing my desire to escape, he curled his lips and tightened his grip on my wrist. A bewitching voice whispered beside my ear, "Be good, it's awake, touch it." The next day, I woke up in George White's bed. He had already left. Thinking back to last night, I felt my face flush. Although we didn't go all the way, it was still quite exhausting. I rubbed my sore waist and got up, only to feel a dampness below. I had a bad feeling about this. I lifted the blanket and, sure enough, my period had arrived, and I had stained George White's bedsheet. I was just thinking about what to do. There was a rapid knocking at the door. Who is it? I opened the door in confusion, only to find an unfamiliar beauty standing there. She was dressed fashionably, with big, wavy curls. As soon as she saw me, her voice turned sharp. Who are you? Why are you in George White's house? Still dressed like this? Last night's pajamas got dirty, so I had no choice but to change into something that doesn't fit quite right. I tugged at the collar. And who are you? Coming to someone else's house and shouting like that is really rude. I am, of course, George White's fiancé. Are you the fiancé? Then what am I? I once lived with Brother Whiteshoe for half a year, and he specifically kept my things in the storage room on the second floor. I never expected that now. A woman like you has taken over my place. She glanced at me with extreme disdain, but I got excited. Sister, I pulled the girl back as she retreated. Didn't you live here? Do you know where your sanitary pads were kept? I pouted. My period has come, but I can't find them anywhere, and there aren't any for sale nearby. Can you help me look for them? The girl was a bit confused. She impatiently shook off my hand. How would I know where he put it? Besides, no girl has ever lived here. So why would he stockpile that kind of thing? No girl has ever lived here. So you were just talking nonsense earlier. You tricked me. I pouted. I didn't. I really need it urgently. The girl stared at me for a few seconds before suddenly realizing, I know who you are. Aren't you Frank Lincoln's? Stella, George White has returned. Brother George White. The girl ran over to George White in her high heels and hugged his arm. George White calmly withdrew his hand. What brings you here? I'm your fiancé. Can't I come? I suddenly felt a bit nervous about what George White might say in response. He walked up to me and handed me the bag in his hand. I didn't know what you use, so I bought everything. George White rubbed my head, coaxing me like a child. Go change first. Leave the dirty clothes there, and don't touch cold water. So he went to buy sanitary pads for me. Of course, I saw the jealous look on the girl's face beside me. But George White didn't even turn his head, just calmly stated the fact. If I remember correctly, we should have called off the engagement. George White, the girl's voice trembled with tears. You don't want to marry me. Is it because of her? The engagement was called off 3 months ago, and I didn't even know Stella back then. But do you know who she really is? I know. George White raised his voice. But it's none of your business. George White pulled open the door and gestured for her to leave. After changing clothes, the girl had already stormed off angrily. George White, who exactly is Frank Lincoln? Why does everyone keep mentioning him? Hearing this, George White pinched my cheek. What, do you care about him that much? Of course not. I'm just curious. After a moment of thought, George White snorted coldly. Just a homewrecker, that's all. Let's not talk about him anymore. George White pulled me onto his lap and placed the hot water bottle on my stomach. Are you feeling very uncomfortable? No, it's just that I've dirted your bed. It's okay, I'll wash it. I can already picture him, cigarette in mouth, scrubbing my little cutie. I never expected that the once cold and distant person could be so gentle now. I wrapped my arms around his neck and kissed the corner of his lips. Don't provoke me. George White's voice was a bit hoarse. I won't. What can he do to me? George White held my waist, his hand sliding up my back. Then he desperately drew the air from my mouth, leaving me completely weak. The phone rang at an inopportune moment. I freed up a hand to answer it. Stella Taylor, where the hell have you been? How dare you delete me? Have you had enough of this nonsense? Come back now. I immediately recognized it as Frank Lincoln, whom I had erased from my memory. Stella Taylor, what are you doing? Is there a man next to you? Frank Lincoln was furious. George White kissed me until I was breathless, his tone as cold as ice. She's not dead, and she was quite comfortable calling me husband. Who are you? Do you know she's my... George White reached out and hung up the phone. Did you hear that? The one ruining our relationship is the male homewrecker. I am speechless. On the other end of the line, Frank Lincoln threw his phone, and everyone in the room fell silent. He drove to the Tang family in a fit of rage. I actually didn't believe what George White said. I still went to ask my best friend. Julia's reply was hesitant. Oh, why bring him up? No, I literally forgot about him. Julia, that's great. He's a total scumbag. He was your fiancé before, but he's a complete jerk. He missed the engagement party and couldn't control his urges. But you were like you were under a spell, completely obsessed with him. But it's great that you've forgotten about him now. I was shocked. He is my fiancé. Then who is George White? A male homewrecker. A certain male homewrecker surnamed White took care of me for a whole week. Stella, George White rubbed my head. I've been quite busy with work lately, and it's about time you got out for some exercise. I'll take you out this afternoon. To be honest, I haven't had enough of slacking off yet. Do you think I've gained weight? No. But he was clearly pinching the flesh on my stomach. All right, then wait for me a bit longer. I need to tidy up first. It's fine, I'll wait however long it takes. In the end, I wore a skirt that didn't reach my knees, paired with plain-colored leather shoes. and put on the pair of pink diamond earrings George White had given me. George White wore that long coat. With his unique temperament and tall stature, the coat was worn very properly, making him look quite dashing. As a native of Beijing, we had pretty much been to all the places worth visiting. George White didn't bother to think too much either, just waved his hand and took me on a shopping spree. Actually, I already had a lot of accessories, but George White always said there were new styles. Before I knew it, I had my eye on several more. Thanks to his identity as Mr. White, not only did I buy more, but the service was also better. Just as I was holding the tie up to George White to see how it looked, I saw the man who had vanished from my memory, yet seemed to be everywhere, Frank Lincoln. In fact, Frank Lincoln was also a bit hesitant to recognize Stella Taylor, but for over a decade, she had always followed behind him, and her image was clearly etched in his mind. He didn't dare to recognize her because the girl who had always followed him was being well taken care of by the man beside her. Stella Taylor had fair skin and a great figure, dressed in exquisite clothes that outlined her superior curves. Around her neck was an expensive pearl necklace, and on her earlobes were the masterpieces of the designer she had always idolized. He had checked that piece, but he always thought Stella Taylor would stay by his side, so whether he bought it early or late didn't matter. It wouldn't be a bad idea to give it to her on their wedding night, but now, she was glowing, smiling. Smiling at that man. She had never smiled at him like that before, but why? It had always been her who revolved around him, who rushed toward him without hesitation, stirring ripples in his heart. Yet, within a few days, she stopped coming to see him. Within a few days, Stella Taylor had already thrown herself into someone else's arms. When Frank Lincoln approached, I instinctively hid behind George White. George White took my hand, signaling me not to be afraid. Stella Taylor, where have you been all these days? Don't you know we're engaged? I think we should move the wedding forward, or I might not even know if you run off with some other man. George White sneered. Wedding? Are you confused, young Master Lincoln? From the moment you refused to save her, she was no longer your fiancé. She is now my fiancé. Frank Lincoln stepped forward. Yours? Ha, Stella Taylor and I had an engagement banquet. What do you two have? An illicit affair? George White's eyes were like frost, and when he spoke again, his voice was icy. So what? Everything depends on whether Stella is willing. Ha, does she know you lied to her? George White tightened his grip on my hand. I knew he was nervous. I shook his hand in return. Frank Lincoln, you still have your wedding dynasty pigtail uncut, don't you? It's the 21st century. Why are you still clinging to the old ways of parental orders and matchmaker arrangements? Besides, you didn't even show up at the engagement party, did you? Who I choose is none of your damn business. Stella Taylor, I didn't mean to miss it that day. Something just came up last minute. Besides, Stella, I am willing to marry you. Frank Lincoln's face turned pale. Stella, you remember everything. I comforted George White with my gaze. Frank Lincoln, what's so great about you being willing to marry me? No matter what happened in the past, now and in the future, I have nothing to do with you. The marriage alliance is off. I am just myself, and my marriage is my own decision. Frank Lincoln persisted relentlessly. Stella Taylor, don't you know that you used to really like me? When you come to your senses, you'll regret this. Oh, really? I don't remember. I took George White's hand and prepared to leave. This is so embarrassing. But Frank Lincoln grabbed my wrist, his expression cold. Stella Taylor, I'll give you one more chance. Choose him or me. You're crazy. Let go. Stella, you weren't like this before. George White tightened his grip on Frank Lincoln's hand. She told you to let go. Can't you hear? Without exaggeration, if this weren't a society governed by law, George White would not hesitate to break his wrist. George White held me as we returned to the car. George White, I want to know the truth. George White carefully began to speak. Previously, the cooperation between the White family and other families wasn't going smoothly. After investigating, we discovered that the Lincoln and Tang families were behind it. My subordinates, without my permission, kidnapped you. Who would have thought that Frank Lincoln was unwilling to save you? You had an accident and lost your memory while trying to escape, and afterward, you were sent to me. Stella, although I might have had some intention of using you, I would never hurt you. I didn't really mean to deceive you. If you want to go back, I'll let you go. George White gripped my hand, trembling slightly. He lowered his gaze, and for the first time, I saw a sense of desolation in him. Of course, I knew he didn't mean to hide it from me. He didn't take my phone. If you want to know what happened, just ask someone. He also didn't restrict me from going out. I stay at home simply because I'm lazy. On the contrary, I'm indulging in my attraction to men. And my life is quite enjoyable. Who else can I blame? I'm not going back, really." George White was puzzled. Not going back to the Tang family either. To him, I'm just a tool for a marriage alliance. Besides, going back to the Tang family is exhausting. No playing, no sleeping, no pursuing the career I love. I'm constantly bound by rules, forced to learn everything that could capture a man's heart. I kept George White's face. "All I need to do is flirt with the man I like, alright. We won't go back." I sat in his arms, just a little taller than him. George White then lifted his head to kiss me. With one hand, I wrapped my arm around his neck, while the other slipped inside his clothes. In the cramped space, the sounds of panting and wetness were clearly audible. George White held down my restless hand. "Not now, darling, it'll be uncomfortable in the car." I softened my voice and whined, "But we're still so far from home." I lifted my leg and nudged him. "What do we do about this?" George White placed me on the seat. "Who said I don't have a place nearby?" Racing all the way home, before I could even get familiar with the surroundings, George White swept me off my feet and carried me into the bedroom. "You were teasing me earlier, and now you can't escape." Even though I had seen it before, I still blushed when I sat on the edge of the bed and George White unbuttoned his shirt. The temperature in the room rose as George White kissed away the tears on my face. "Darling, let it out." Outside the window, the night was thick, the moon swinging in the clouds, as something quietly reached its peak. At the CB bar, "Brother Lincoln, that little lapdog of yours." "Shut up." Frank Lincoln slammed his phone, and everyone in the room fell silent. Wine bottles were shattered all over the floor of the private room. Frank Lincoln wrapped his arm around the woman. Drinking, kissing, revelry. He wanted to forget all of this. The woman lay in his arms. "Brother White." Frank Lincoln paused, then abruptly pushed the woman away. "Who told you to call me that?" Only Stella Taylor had ever called him that before. Back then, he found it disgusting, but now he misses it immensely. "Get out. All of you, get out." Frank Lincoln drove everyone away. His childhood friend poured a glass of wine. "TSK, emotions are always controlled by the one who takes the initiative. Kevin is right." Frank Lincoln tilted his head back and took a gulp of wine. "So what do you think we should do? When it comes to women, if they're taken away, just take them back." The thought of Stella Taylor smiling so happily at George White made Frank Lincoln grit his teeth in frustration. Frank Lincoln smashed the wine glass and drove away. I didn't expect to be kidnapped again. Just by going out at night, I ran into Frank Lincoln again. He walked quickly towards me, and I instinctively stepped back. He covered my mouth and nose, and a strange smell rushed into my nostrils. After that, I lost consciousness. I woke up in bed, and fortunately, this time I wasn't tied up. I quickly got up to open the door, but Frank Lincoln pushed it open and entered. "Frank Lincoln, you actually drugged me." "Stella Taylor, don't say it so harshly. You were always mine. I just took you back." "That's enough." "Frank Lincoln, let's end it here." Frank Lincoln backed me into a corner, pinching my chin. "Stella, once you regain your memory, you'll like me again." I turned my face away. "Calm down. I've already regained my memory, but I truly don't like you anymore." This is true. Since I last saw him, my memories have gradually returned, but that no longer matters. After all, it was just a youthful obsession, repeatedly hitting a wall, ultimately turning into disappointment, vanished into thin air. Actually, I'm quite grateful for this memory loss. It has lessened my pain and allowed me to embrace a new life. Frank Lincoln raised his voice, his emotions somewhat agitated. "Impossible. The old Stella liked me the most. You said it yourself. That was in the past." "I'm sorry, Stella. I never realized my feelings for you before. Now I know I was wrong. Let's be together properly." Frank Lincoln pressed my shoulders and kissed me forcefully. "Get away. What's in the past should stay in the past." I pushed him away and slapped him across the face. Frank Lincoln wiped the corner of his mouth with his index finger, his eyes swirling with emotion. "Stella Taylor, what's so great about George White? How long have you been with him? Can it compare to the bond we've shared for over 10 years? "It can." Frank Lincoln grabbed my wrist, twisted it behind my back, and knelt on my legs to pin me down. "But we're already engaged. You'll always be mine." He undid my clothes with one hand, kissing my cheek haphazardly. "You're insane." "Yes, I am insane. I went insane the moment I saw you with him." I suppressed my fear and recalled the self-defense techniques George White had taught me. Seizing the moment, I bit down hard on his arm, then drove my knee upward and flipped over with all my strength. Frank Lincoln couldn't dodge in time. And the lamp I swung with full force smashed into his head. Taking advantage of the momentum, I landed a few more blows. He was knocked unconscious by my strikes, but the villa's door wouldn't open. Fortunately, I found Frank Lincoln's phone, calling George White's phone. George White, Stella, don't worry, I'll be there soon. Hearing George White's voice, I finally couldn't hold back my tears. Frank Lincoln, he kidnapped me. I found out. I'm almost there, don't panic, where are you now? When George White found me, I was hiding in the bathroom. He picked me up and whispered soothingly, "It's okay now, I'm here." The loud banging on the door jolted Frank Lincoln awake from his faint. He looked at the scene in the room. "George White, who gave you the nerve to break into my house?" George White wrapped me in his coat, his fingers wiping away the tears on my face. He whispered softly yet fiercely in my ear, "Darling, how dare he tie you up? Should we finish him off?" He turned his head, the chill in his eyes sending shivers down one's spine. Frank Lincoln was so frightened that his legs went weak. With just a glance from George White, the bodyguard beside him immediately restrained Frank Lincoln and began to take action. His men were not ordinary bodyguards, but seasoned fighters who had once followed him abroad. Every punch lands with a solid thud, delivering intense pain without being fatal. George White covered my ears. "Be good, don't listen, let's go home." After resting for many days upon returning, George White went to great lengths to get Frank Lincoln locked up. The Lincoln family was also dealt a devastating blow. During this time, Charles White came to see me. He arrived with a bruised and swollen face. "Did your brother hit you again?" "Of course not." Charles White bared his teeth. "A sister, very beautiful, but her heart is too ruthless. A few guys, tempted by her looks, tried to abduct her. I was the one who saved her. But she ended up beating me up along with them. But she really is beautiful. When she was hitting me, I thought, it would be worth dying under her fists." I am speechless. George White was speechless. "By the way, brother, when are you two getting married?" George White held my hand and discussed with me. "I want to go to the Tang family next month to propose with 2% of the White family's shares as a betrothal gift. That much. Give it all to my father." "Yes, this is my stance," I sighed. "You might as well give it to me instead of him. That old man just likes to use me. It's as if he's selling his daughter. I want to break away from the Tang family. My marriage is my own decision. Of course, there's a share for you too." George White pinched my cheek. "And it's much more than his. The entire White family's future belongs to you. But giving your father shares is a gesture to show my stance. I can't let outsiders look down on you." I thought for a moment. "Then give it to my sister. After my mother passed away, it was basically my sister who took care of me. An elder sister is like a mother. Actually, I haven't suffered much. My sister has had it even harder. Now she works at Tang Corporation and is always being overshadowed. But my sister is not only beautiful, she's also incredibly efficient. With your help, she'd have an easier time." "Okay, can I meet her then? Let's see if she's as beautiful as my sister." Charles White winced from the pain on his face but still couldn't resist cracking a joke. "Oh, my sister has learned Sonda. You might just earn yourself another beating." The next day, George White went to propose marriage. My father was furious. George White, half forcing and half threatening, finally agreed. My sister, with a grim face, opened her mouth to threaten. "If Stella." George White nodded. "Don't worry." Somehow, Charles White hid in the corner, too scared to make a sound. George White moved my studio to the busiest area in the city. Even though my father controlled me in the past, I still graduated from a foreign school and worked my way up to become a top designer in the country. Now with George White's help, I'm even more in my element in the industry. But inevitably, I've been a bit neglectful of George White. Late at night, George White wraps his arms around me from behind. "Stella, have a little pity on me." "George White, don't move around." George White pulled out my chair and crawled under the desk. "What are you doing?" "I won't bother you. Go ahead with your work." "Oh." The moment the warm tip of his tongue brushed against my skin, I knew I couldn't trust him. The lines in my hand had long since gone crooked, soft and shapeless. "Stella." George White raised his glistening fingertips. His voice was low and hoarse. "How about we wear the set you designed tonight?" After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.